I got home and thought I was losing my mind. My garage door wouldn't open. The remote blinked red, the keypad did nothing, and when I walked around the back, my stomach dropped. A thick industrial-grade padlock hung off the side latch like it belonged to a bank vault. Right there, bold as brass, someone had locked me out of my own garage. And to make it worse, parked directly in front of it, like a middle finger in lemon-yellow paint, sat Karen's SUV. Not just parked, angled in with her front bumper 2 inches from the door, completely blocking access. I stood frozen, disbelief coursing through my veins. That garage wasn't just for tools and storage. My late grandfather's restored 1971 Mustang was inside. So were the custom power tools I'd saved up for over a decade. And now? Locked. Blocked. Stolen in broad daylight, but with HOA branding. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "Garage access suspended per HOA decision. Contact President Karen for appeal." That's when I realized, she wasn't just testing me. She was declaring war. 2 weeks earlier, the HOA had tried to fine me for unregulated structure modification because I had repainted the garage trim. The kicker? The garage was built years before the HOA even existed. My property was grandfathered in. But Karen, the newly elected president for life of the HOA, had other ideas. She ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom, with monthly inspections, random rule changes, and fines that mysteriously disappeared into maintenance budgets. At first, I ignored her. I had the county permits, but then she started pushing harder. First it was a warning letter, then a fine, then another, each one angrier than the last. I sent certified letters with copies of legal documents. She responded by having her committee mark my garage for community use evaluation, which apparently, in her twisted logic, gave her the right to chain it shut and claim it was now shared HOA property. I didn't even know where to begin. I marched over to Karen's house, knocked on the door, and was greeted by her 12-year-old son holding a juice pouch and a Nerf gun. He didn't even blink as he said, "Mom says talk to the HOA email." Then he closed the door. When I finally tracked Karen down at the HOA office, she was sitting behind a desk labeled President's Suite, sipping from a mug that said Queen of Compliance. She didn't even stand. Just pointed at a laminated sign behind her that read, "All HOA decisions are final." I tried to remain calm as I laid out every document showing her violation. Her response? "Well, those papers are old. The bylaws changed last quarter. Besides, you're not even listed as a contributing member. The community voted your garage is better used for collective storage. We're a sharing neighborhood now." I wanted to scream. Instead, I left, got in my truck, and sat in the driveway staring at the locked garage. That's when I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. I had a Ring cam mounted inside the garage facing out. I pulled it up on my phone, scrolled through the motion alerts, and there it was. 4 nights earlier. At 2:46 a.m. Karen, in her robe, holding a flashlight and a long silver padlock. She crept up, looped the lock through the latch, clicked it shut, then walked back to her SUV and drove off, only to return 30 seconds later to repark it in front of the door. Then she posed for a photo with the garage in the background, holding up a clipboard like she was on a magazine cover. I blinked, then laughed, then got angry, then laughed again, because she'd also done something incredibly stupid. When she turned to walk away, her hoodie slipped just enough to reveal the lanyard clipped to her pocket. Hanging from it? A shiny key, likely to the lock. I hit save, downloaded the video, and texted it to my lawyer. Then I started planning. The thing about Karen was, she thrived on control. She didn't care about fairness, legality, or even community. She cared about appearances. If she could bully you into submission while sipping tea and writing HOA bulletins, she was happy. She thought no one would fight back because most neighbors just wanted to avoid conflict. But I wasn't most neighbors. What she didn't know was that I had built that garage myself, brick by brick with my father before he passed. It wasn't just about storage. It was legacy. And no amount of fake bylaws or sugar-coated tyranny was going to keep me locked out of what was mine. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office, armed with footage, timelines, and HOA map. The clerk looked stunned. "They declared your personal garage as a communal unit?" she asked. "That's not just wrong. That's probably illegal." She passed it to the enforcement team. But government wheels turned slowly. And I had a better plan. A higher plan. Literally. You see, I wasn't just some homeowner with a beef. I was also an aerospace engineer with friends in high places. One of those friends, Brian, worked in precision airlifting for construction firms. The kind of guy who could airlift a mobile office onto a rooftop or fly HVAC systems into stadiums. I called him up. "Crazy question," I said. "How hard would it be to airlift a 2-car garage, given it's on a concrete slab with pre-drilled anchor points?" There was a pause. Then a slow, curious laugh. "If it's under 8,000 pounds and you've got a flat load area, we can lift it." "Why?" I told him everything. He laughed again. "Send me coordinates." I wasn't going to destroy the garage. I wasn't even going to damage Karen's SUV. No, I wanted poetic justice. I wanted her to see what happens when you lock a man out of his own legacy and think you'll get away with it. So I made the calls. I coordinated with a private field just beyond HOA borders. I started prepping the slab. Quietly. No one noticed the harness points I reinstalled or the slight grading work I commissioned under the guise of drainage improvements. Karen was too busy writing new neighborhood harmony emails and fining people for untrimmed hedges to care. Perfect. Then came the bait. I needed her SUV back in front of the garage. Problem was, she rotated parking spots every day to avoid suspicion. But I knew her weaknesses: social status and gossip. So I staged a neighborhood potluck and open garage showcase. I invited everyone. Sent custom flyers. Promised a raffle prize and gourmet hot dogs. Karen showed up early. In her lemon SUV. Parked dead center in front of the garage. And strutted into the party like she owned the place. And right there, while she took selfies with a folding table full of pastries, my crew worked in the shadows behind the garage. Cables ready. Hooks in place. She had no idea her car, her precious HOA chariot, was about to go airborne. The lock she placed had become the anchor to her own downfall. And I had the remote control. The sky was about to become part of the story. The morning after the block party, Karen strutted down the street like a politician who just passed a new law. She even had the audacity to wave at me as she walked her yappy Pomeranian, Cinnamon, past my house. Her SUV was still parked directly in front of the garage, and the padlock she'd slapped on the door hung there like a badge of power. But she didn't know the chopper team was scheduled to arrive in 48 hours. In 2 days, everything would change. Until then, I had to play it cool and collect more ammunition, both for legal reasons and for pure poetic satisfaction. That morning I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a stack of printed violations, 8 pages long. One was for public endangerment through unauthorized equipment storage, which supposedly referred to my ladder leaning against the back fence. Another was for visual pollution caused by unapproved exterior color contrast. That one made me laugh. Apparently, my dark gray garage trim wasn't HOA approved, even though it matched the color scheme from their own community guide. The funniest violation of all was listed as garage altitude discrepancy. According to Karen's pseudo-engineer assessment, my garage was approximately 11 inches higher than the community's visual symmetry zone, whatever that meant. I could only imagine her standing outside with a measuring tape and an ego the size of Texas, trying to claim the sky itself was a violation of HOA regulations. Things only got more ridiculous. Karen started sending out weekly HOA newsletters filled with propaganda. One issue had a section called "Keeping the Community Beautiful," where she featured a photo of my garage with a huge red X across it and the caption, "Example of what not to allow in our neighborhood." Another issue claimed the HOA was repurposing underutilized structures for communal benefit, using fancy phrases that masked the reality. She was stealing people's property under the guise of group approval. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended solely for amusement, Karen unveiled her latest project, the Community Utility Redistribution Program. It was a fancy title for a scheme where she could legally claim any garage, shed, or external storage space not being actively used for an HOA-approved function. Of course, no one had voted for this. There had been no discussions. But the board, all hand-picked by Karen, nodded along like sheep. I waited until she finished her smug little speech before raising my hand. She reluctantly acknowledged me, calling me the neighbor in question. I stood up, smiled politely, and said, "I have a quick question for the board. Is it standard practice to lock someone out of their property at 2:46 a.m.? Karen's face twitched. The room fell quiet. "Because I have the footage. Night vision. Clear as day. Shows our president here placing a lock on my garage, with her car parked in front of it. Oh, and she posed for a selfie after doing it." A few people gasped. The HOA treasurer dropped her pen. Karen tried to recover, stumbling over her words, saying the footage was probably doctored or taken out of context. I pulled out my phone and cast the video to the meeting room's smart TV. There it was. Karen, in fuzzy slippers, clicking the padlock, unaware she was being recorded by my internal security camera. She turned the key, took her selfie, and drove away like a cat burglar with a clipboard. Karen's face turned redder than her lipstick. "That video isn't admissible. You didn't have permission to record me," she barked, grasping at straws. But the HOA bylaws didn't apply to privately owned surveillance systems on private property. A few board members started shifting uncomfortably in their seat. One even whispered something and quietly got up to leave. That night, Karen sent out an emergency bulletin claiming the footage was fake news and blaming the controversy on a neighbor attempting to smear the HOA's leadership through slanderous digital manipulation. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen it, and now whispers were spreading. Even the city started paying attention. A zoning inspector named Glenn, who had apparently been friends with Karen since high school, came to check the garage. He tried to act official, taking fake notes on a clipboard and nodding as if the altitude of my roofline was a major threat to the entire zip code. But when I handed him my county-approved blueprints, complete with timestamps, original signatures, and inspection records, he looked like a man who just realized he was holding a stick of dynamite. "Oh," he said, awkwardly flipping the pages. I wasn't aware you had permits going that far back." I raised an eyebrow and offered a polite shrug. "Yeah. Before the HOA even existed. Before the subdivision. Before the welcome sign. Want a copy for your records?" He nodded and practically jogged back to his truck. Karen must have expected him to come back with a bulldozer, but instead, he ghosted her. Things got quiet for a day. Then Karen tried one more stunt. I came home to find spray-painted lines on my driveway in neon pink, along with an official notice, duct-taped to my mailbox. According to the printout, I had 48 hours to paint over non-approved driveway elements, or the HOA would enforce corrective measures. I nearly choked from laughing. Karen was so desperate to reassert dominance that she spray-painted someone else's driveway to punish them for painting it wrong. I snapped photos, sent them to the City Code Enforcement Department, and uploaded them to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "When your HOA president forgets which driveway belongs to her husband's mistress." The post went viral. Neighbors I hadn't even spoken to yet began siding with me. People shared stories. Karen had fined a veteran for flying a flag that was too loud in the wind. She'd ticketed a teenager for using sidewalk chalk too close to the street. One woman confessed Karen had once tried to enter her backyard without permission to measure fence compliance. It wasn't just me. Karen had been treating the entire neighborhood like her little kingdom, and now the cracks were showing. The perfect storm was brewing, and I had a garage with a full tank of karma waiting inside it. With the chopper team scheduled to arrive the next evening, everything had to be flawless. I had engineers pre-check the lifting points. The anchoring cables were delivered and pre-attached to avoid suspicion. I made sure Karen's SUV was exactly where it needed to be by organizing one final bait, a neighborhood sustainability photo shoot. I claimed I was converting my garage into a solar-powered gardening station and invited HOA leaders to come take pictures for the monthly newsletter. Karen took the bait immediately. She couldn't resist anything involving cameras and fake environmentalism. On the day of the shoot, she showed up wearing a sun hat, cargo shorts, and a laminated name tag that read Karen, HOA President, Community Growth Advisor. Her SUV? Parked perfectly, front bumper just inches from the garage like always. She posed in front of my garage and even suggested we take a few shots of her standing triumphantly near the communal asset. I had to bite my cheek to keep from grinning. Once she left, I sent the final go-ahead to Brian. Weather clear. Coordinates set. Load balanced. At dawn tomorrow, the sky was going to carry away the lie she built, and for once, gravity would be on my side. The night before liftoff, I barely slept. The garage stood there in the moonlight, quiet and locked like a loaded secret. Karen's lemon SUV was parked exactly where I wanted it, still smugly angled against my garage door, as if her car alone could guard her twisted power trip. But everything was in place now. Cables pre-fitted through discreet openings near the slab foundation, a reinforced hook installed beneath the floor that no one could see, and the hydraulic anchor system hidden under a fresh layer of gravel I'd laid down 2 nights ago. It all looked like a normal yard with an overbuilt garage and a nosy neighbor with bad parking habit. But by morning, it would become a neighborhood legend. At sunrise, the sky turned a brilliant orange, and the first buzz of rotor blades hummed in the distance. It was subtle at first, almost like a tractor or leaf blower kicking on somewhere behind the houses, but then the unmistakable chop-chop of a twin-rotor airlift chopper thundered into earshot. That was Brian, right on schedule. He wasn't flying it himself, that would have been too risky, but he had sent his best team, and they were pre-briefed down to the last detail. The moment I heard the helicopter crest the trees, I hit the alert in the group chat. Operation Altitude was a go. The neighborhood began to stir. People came outside with cups of coffee and confused faces, squinting at the noise overhead. A few even pulled out their phones. The HOA email had been strangely quiet the past 2 days, and now here came a sky beast large enough to lift shipping containers, flying over their peaceful cul-de-sac. I walked out onto my lawn with a smile on my face and a tablet in hand, coordinating with the lift team via private comms. Karen, of course, wasn't up yet. She liked to sleep in late on Saturdays, especially after a full day of faux inspections and impromptu HOA speeches. Her SUV, however, was right where it needed to be, sealed up inside my garage, which had become the payload of the day. 30 minutes earlier, I had quietly opened the side entrance with my spare key and winched her SUV inside. I didn't need to hotwire it or break anything, just put it in neutral and roll it into position. Once inside, the pre-installed cable cradles locked into place beneath the floor. The garage was now fully loaded and ready for takeoff, with Karen's precious vehicle acting as the dead weight that would help balance the structure mid-lift. I closed the side door, snapped the lock shut, and secured the lift joints just as the chopper gave its signal. We were ready. As the helicopter descended closer, neighborhood chatter rose to a low roar. People were filming, pointing, speculating. A few neighbors even walked toward my yard, clearly hoping for answers. But I just kept smiling and redirected them to the sidewalk. The chopper hovered above with military precision, its hooks lowered on thick steel cables that danced slightly in the early morning breeze. The lift team moved fast. 2 ground crew in jumpsuits emerged from the side alley, clipped the hooks to the anchors, gave the thumbs up, and within moments the entire structure began to groan. The first moment of tension hit when the garage shifted. At first, it was just a minor tilt, like it was stretching its legs after a long nap. Then came the creak, a long, aching sound that echoed like thunder down the block. Karen's SUV inside gave a muffled clunk as the tires settled on the slab floor. Then, slowly but surely, the garage began to lift. Not jarringly, not like in cartoons. It rose smoothly, gracefully, like it had been designed to fly. The crowd gasped. Phones were held higher. A kid cheered. Someone yelled, "Is that a prank or a demolition?" Then, right on cue, Karen came storming out of her house in a pink bathrobe and half-worn slippers. She looked up, squinting at the rising garage with a look of pure confusion etched across her face. Her hair was a mess, her expression baffled. She turned toward the sound, only to realize her SUV was gone. She looked to the left, to the right, and then her mouth dropped open as she recognized the garage being airlifted over the neighborhood. Inside was her car. Her treasure. Her statement piece. She screamed. "What is happening? Who authorized this? That's illegal. Put it down. Put it down right now," she shrieked, pointing and stomping like a malfunctioning parade float. But the chopper kept climbing. The lift team waved down at her, not mockingly, but with practiced calm. They weren't here to argue. They were here to fly. The garage was now 20 feet in the air, and rising steadily toward the outer field, the very land Karen had annexed for future HOA events. That land had conveniently just been rezoned for temporary storage use by the city council last week. I had filed the paperwork myself, publicly, legally, with Karen too distracted by her cupcake-fueled ego to notice. Karen ran into the street in bare feet, screaming for someone to stop the helicopter, but there was nothing she could do. I walked up beside her calmly, tablet still in hand, and said, "Don't worry. Your car is safe. And so is my garage. I'm just relocating it, temporarily. Should be fun for the next community newsletter." She whirled on me, her eyes wide. "You maniac! You think this is a joke? You've broken so many laws. You're finished." But she didn't know what I knew. That this move wasn't just petty, it was ironclad. I had filed an emergency property protection claim with the city, arguing that the HOA had unlawfully seized private asset. I had submitted video evidence, expert testimony, and documentation that showed my property predated their jurisdiction. I had even invited a local news outlet, who was now on their way with a drone camera crew to capture the final descent. Karen had picked the wrong battle. What she saw as vandalism was actually a rescue operation, one sanctioned by zoning law and perfectly timed with airspace permits and liability waivers. She kept sputtering legal threats, but the more she screamed, the more ridiculous she looked. And that's when the first local journalist arrived. A small news van pulled up at the edge of the cul-de-sac. The reporter stepped out, mic in hand, camera rolling, and asked me a simple question. "Sir, why is your garage being lifted over the neighborhood with a vehicle inside it?" I smiled, adjusted my sunglasses, and replied, "Because HOA President Karen locked me out of it and claimed it was community property. So I'm making sure the community gets to enjoy it. At her expense." Literally. The reporter blinked. Karen gasped. The camera captured every second. As the garage reached its peak altitude, the chopper slowly banked and began its gentle descent toward the empty community field. Karen tried to follow on foot, screaming about impounding orders and restraining orders, but the sheriff's deputy who'd been watching from his cruiser finally stepped in. He had received my documentation in advance and had already spoken with zoning enforcement. He walked up to her and said, "Ma'am, you're not authorized to obstruct this operation. Please step aside." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but she had no rebuttal. No plan. No authority left to cling to. Minutes later, the garage was set down gently in the grassy lot, leveled and secured. The helicopter crew detached the hooks, gave a final wave, and flew off into the blue. The crowd broke into applause. Not all of them understood what had just happened, but they knew justice when they saw it. Karen turned and stormed back to her house, red-faced and silent for the first time in weeks. Back at the lot, I opened the garage door and wheeled Karen's SUV halfway out. I placed a sign next to it that read, HOA President's Office, open by appointment only. And then I locked it again. Not with a padlock. With a smile. Because the sky had spoken. And Karen? She had finally been grounded. The moment the garage touched down on the open community field, the transformation was complete. What had once been my personal, functional, legally constructed garage, unjustly locked and hijacked by Karen, was now resting like an alien artifact in the very space she had intended for her next big HOA wellness festival. And sitting inside, as pristine as ever, was her precious SUV, still perfectly wedged between the garage's support beams like a trophy of entitlement. The crowd that had gathered around to witness the airlift hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, more people were arriving now, drawn in by the sight, the buzz, and the unmistakable scent of justice being served on a silver rotor blade. Karen wasn't handling it well. She stood at the edge of the grass, clutching her phone and pacing like she was auditioning for a reality show meltdown. Her mouth moved rapidly, likely talking to either a lawyer, the HOA's insurance broker, or some poor code enforcement officer who had no idea what he was about to get dragged into. Meanwhile, I stood next to the garage like a man who just moved into a new home, hands in pockets, nodding as residents passed by. Some gave thumbs up. A few even laughed openly. One elderly couple approached and asked if they could take a photo with the building that finally shut Karen up. I gladly agreed. The news crew had stayed as well, capturing footage from every angle. Their drone buzzed in the air, sweeping across the scene like a hawk recording suburban history. The reporter was interviewing neighbors, asking them about their experiences with the HOA. One woman choked up describing how Karen fined her for having potted plants that didn't coordinate with her porch furniture. Another man explained how Karen once threatened to file a noise complaint against his 6-year-old daughter for excessive squeaking while swinging. The narrative was writing itself. This wasn't just about one garage. It was about an entire community fed up with one woman's reign of faux authority. The real storm arrived an hour later in the form of a shiny black SUV with tinted windows. A man stepped out in a suit, briefcase in hand, and marched directly toward me. Karen sprinted across the field like a kid chasing a runaway balloon and met him halfway. I couldn't hear their conversation, but her animated arm movements and frantic pointing toward the garage said it all. She was calling in legal firepower. The man in the suit walked toward me with calculated steps and introduced himself as Richard Lang, legal counsel for the HOA. I offered a firm handshake and a calm expression. He cut straight to the point. Mr. Halstead, we believe your actions today constitute criminal mischief, property endangerment, and the illegal relocation of a structure without HOA authorization. My client would like you to return the garage to its original location immediately and issue a public apology for the disruption. I just stared at him for a moment, then pulled a folder from under my arm and handed it over. Inside was a complete file. My original zoning documents, the airlift permit authorized by the county, the emergency protective order filed due to Karen's unlawful padlocking, and the certified video of her committing the act. His brows furrowed as he flipped through the pages. I didn't interrupt. I wanted the reality to sink in naturally. When he got to the part about the footage, he stopped reading. You recorded this? He asked, tilting the paper slightly. It was recorded by a private security camera inside my own garage, I said calmly. The same garage your client trespassed into and illegally secured with her own padlock while leaving her vehicle in violation of the property boundary. He didn't respond, just lowered the folder slowly and glanced toward Karen, who was now wringing her hands and pretending to cry. Then he sighed. You'll be hearing from us, he said weakly. I look forward to it, I replied. Karen's next move was classic desperation. She tried to have the police intervene. But when the local officer arrived and reviewed the evidence I'd already submitted to the county, he laughed. Literally laughed. "So let me get this straight," he said aloud. "You locked his garage without legal authority, parked your car in front of it, and now that he's moved the garage, with proper permits, you're saying he stole your car?" She tried to spin it, claiming it was an unauthorized structure, now causing public risk. But the officer just shook his head and said, "Ma'am, unless you have something solid, I suggest you stop talking before you say something that actually does require paperwork." She stomped away, flustered and red-faced, her authority unraveling with every minute. The day passed like a block party. Neighbors mingled in the field. Someone brought folding chairs. A group of teenagers set up a speaker and started blasting music, calling it the Freedom Garage Rave. I stood back and let it all unfold. I wasn't out for chaos, I just wanted balance restored. But watching Karen stew in her own undoing while the neighborhood turned my act of rebellion into a celebration? That was just a bonus. By sunset, the HOA board members, most of whom had stayed silent or complicit under Karen's thumb, began to make statements. One emailed a resignation notice. Another publicly apologized on the community page. A third said they'd be requesting a vote to dissolve the current HOA leadership altogether. Momentum had shifted, and the Queen had no more pawns. Karen, however, had one last card to play. She posted a live video on the HOA's Facebook page titled, "The Truth Behind Today's Attack." In it, she tried to paint herself as a victim of bullying, claiming I had weaponized aircraft against her and endangered civilian property. But the comments were brutal. People pointed out her hypocrisy, her history of selective enforcement, and most of all, the footage that clearly showed her committing the original offense. The video became a PR disaster. Within an hour, it had more laughing reactions than likes, and someone clipped a part where she screamed, "He lifted my legacy," and turned it into a remix with techno beat. I spent the evening locking up the garage securely and placing a simple sign in front, "Relocated due to unlawful HOA seizure. Pending return upon formal apology." I didn't expect an apology anytime soon, but the sign was a nice touch. It also made the legal angle bulletproof. If Karen or the HOA attempted further retaliation, the sign made it clear I was still open to a civil resolution, not revenge. But everyone could see who was really being civil. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a letter signed by 15 homeowners requesting a full board vote to recall the current HOA president. They asked if I would be willing to act as interim chair until a new board was elected. I laughed, read the letter again, and walked out to the field one more time. Karen was sitting in her SUV, still inside the garage, windows rolled down, talking to someone on speakerphone. She didn't even look at me. She just closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat like she was hoping the earth would open up and swallow the entire building whole. That garage, which she once tried to claim as hers, was now her silent monument. A physical reminder of overreach, arrogance, and the fatal mistake of thinking nobody would ever push back. And as the sun rose higher and cast long shadows across the field, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the best way to fight tyranny wasn't with shouting or paperwork, but with cables, a helicopter, and one perfect lift. The following week felt like a calm after a storm, except the kind of calm where everything around you is still smoldering and everyone's pretending they didn't just witness a helicopter carry a garage across the neighborhood. The field where I had gently set my garage now had a footpath carved into the grass from how often people were walking over just to take pictures. It had become an unofficial landmark, part tourist stop, part community symbol of rebellion, and entirely a monument to one woman's fall from power. Karen, who had once lorded over HOA meetings with the smugness of a sitcom villain, had become a walking cautionary tale. She hadn't shown her face at another board gathering since the incident. Her SUV was still parked inside the garage. Whether she was too embarrassed to reclaim it or still clinging to the hope that she could spin the whole thing into a victory, I didn't care. I had made my point. Now it was time to make it permanent. A few days after the lift, I was served a formal lawsuit from Karen through her attorney Richard Lang. She was suing me for emotional damages, unauthorized property manipulation, and public defamation. She demanded compensation for her car being illegally detained and claimed I'd endangered her livelihood as a community leader. The document read like a parody of a real complaint. Half of it sounded like it was copied from a soap opera script. I forwarded it to my attorney, Claire, who'd been waiting for this. She was a quiet, brilliant legal strategist with a special hatred for bullies. She read the filing, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Let's return the favor." Claire filed a counterclaim by the end of the day. It detailed every violation Karen had committed, from falsifying HOA documents to illegal padlocking, trespassing, and impersonating a municipal authority. The footage from my ring cam was included, as were copies of all the fines she'd issued to me without due process, and statements from other neighbors who had their own horror stories. One homeowner even had a photo of Karen in their backyard holding a measuring tape against their fence while they were out of town. The case escalated quickly. Karen's attorney, once smug and confident, now sent a panicked request for private mediation. But Claire wasn't interested in backroom deals. She knew we had something stronger. Not just a legal case, but a pattern of abuse that could lead to the complete dismantling of Karen's power within the HOA. So we pushed forward. The hearing was set, and the date circled in red ink on both our calendars. In the meantime, I kept showing up to the empty HOA meetings, sitting in the front row with a coffee, waiting patiently for anyone to bring up old business. Most of the board members resigned by the second week. A few apologized to me in person. One of them even brought me cookies. It was like watching a castle crumble one brick at a time, except each brick had Karen's initials on it. When the hearing finally came, it wasn't held in a grand courtroom or some dramatic courtroom drama set. It was in a plain government building with buzzing fluorescent lights and a small audience of interested neighbors who had taken time off work just to witness what was being dubbed the garage trial. Karen arrived dressed like she was meeting the Queen of England, complete with a dramatic scarf and sunglasses indoors. Her attorney shuffled behind her, carrying a stack of papers he clearly didn't believe in. On our side of the room, Claire stood with a single folder. She didn't need a mountain of documents, just the truth. The judge, a tired but no-nonsense woman with reading glasses dangling on a chain, called the session to order. Karen's team went first. They claimed I had intentionally humiliated her, damaged her reputation, and endangered her vehicle. When the judge asked how I had gained access to the garage, they tried to argue I had broken in. That's when Claire stood, calmly submitted the footage of Karen herself locking the door in the dead of night, and said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff is suing for emotional distress over property she illegally seized." The judge watched the video in silence, eyebrows slowly lifting as Karen's flashlight-wielding midnight stunt played out on screen. When the lights came back on, the courtroom was still. Then the judge turned and asked Karen flatly, "Did you, or did you not, place this lock yourself?" Karen stammered, tried to pivot, then said she couldn't recall. The judge leaned forward and said, "Let me remind you that perjury in a civil case still has consequences." From there, it was a downward spiral. Every point Karen tried to raise was countered with hard evidence. Her HOA bylaws had no authority over my property. The so-called community resolution she cited to claim my garage was for public use had only one signature, hers. She tried to call her SUV temporarily parked, but the GPS logs I submitted proved it had sat in front of the garage for over 16 days. By the end of it, even her lawyer seemed embarrassed to be there. When the judge asked for final statements, Claire simply said, "The defendant moved his own property, legally, and preserved the plaintiff's vehicle out of courtesy, not obligation." The judge ruled in our favor and ordered Karen to pay damages for trespassing and harassment. But more importantly, she made a public note that Karen's conduct made her unfit to serve in any position of authority regarding neighborhood enforcement. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board met within 48 hours and voted Karen out. Her access to the HOA funds, newsletters, and email blasts was revoked. A new interim board was elected, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a community again. One that didn't feel like it was being watched and ticketed at every turn. People hosted front lawn movie night. Kids rode scooters without fear of noise violations. Someone even spray-painted a mural on their shed that read, "Let Freedom Garage Ring." And no one complained. I didn't return my garage to its original spot right away. I let it sit in the field for a few more weeks like a sculpture, a silent warning to anyone else thinking of trying the same kind of power grab. Karen, meanwhile, became a ghost. She stopped walking her dog. Stopped posting. Word spread that she had put her house up for sale quietly and was planning to move to a neighboring town. No one held a going-away party. Eventually, I did have the garage lifted back to my property. This time, it didn't need an audience. Just a quiet early morning lift and gentle landing back on its original slab. Everything fit perfectly. Not a scratch on it. I stepped inside, ran my hand over the Mustang's hood, and smiled. The lock was gone. The air felt clean. I reconnected the power, flipped on the lights, and breathed in the peaceful hum of justice served. Before I left, I mounted a plaque on the interior wall. It read, "This garage flew so freedom could land." And every time I opened that door after that, I didn't just see tools and steel. I saw a reminder that even in the quietest neighborhoods, tyranny can rise in the form of clipboards and passive-aggressive letters. But sometimes, all it takes is one act of bold defiance to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. Or in this case, lifting it just high enough that everyone could see it for what it really was.